the problem is they have, as you've reported before, 1.4 million. I've seen numbers up to 1.5 million. That is a significant number of Gazans when you're talking about the total population of Gaza being 2.2 million individuals. So that means that the vast majority went into Rafah, squeezed down there. As it is, situation there is very dire. They are in conditions that are really not clean, not sanitary, not safe, really not healthy for children and families. And when you're talking about pursuing an operation, and they need to pursue those operations quickly, they've already started, as we've seen today. You don't have time really to move. It's a nice talking point to say, don't worry, we're going to move everybody north, or we're going to move them to designated areas. The designated area that I saw in Israeli press reporting was the size of Ben Gurion Airport. But there's no way that 1.4 million people can move easily to that area and fit in that area and be taken care of in a dignified way. And so I'm very concerned that this is going to cause chaos. And the U.S. government has said that. Both President Biden, the U.S. UN ambassador have come out very clearly on this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It seems Biden has sharpened in many ways his language around Israel and what it should do in recent days. And yet it doesn't necessarily seem that Bibi Netanyahu is hearing that message. We heard from him on the Sunday shows over the weekend. He also said those who say that under no circumstances should we enter Rafah are basically saying lose the war, keep Hamas there. Is that effectively what the administration is telling Israel?
No, what and I see when I heard that, and I thought that was not fair to say publicly, because the Israeli government knows exactly what the U.S. government is saying. And what the U.S. is trying to say is, listen, you have to prioritize your threats. And is this threat worth going after? And that's how, by the way, that's how the U.S. pursues war. Is the threat worth going after, given the collateral damage you expect to happen, given how many number of civilians will die, or given what it will be like for these civilians who've moved there to uproot yet again, and to go where exactly? I heard the Israeli government, I heard Bibi Netanyahu come out, and he said today, I believe, that he agreed with the Americans. But again, I have to. He agreed on. It's very much a public talking point. He said he agreed on the protection of civilians, and therefore they would continue going to Rafah, but that they assured everyone they would set up something very solid and stable for those civilians there. But there is a reality to this, and that is that it's 1.5 million people. It's no joke. And they've already gone into Rafah. And so the U.S., what they're trying to say is this threat really worth it? And I'll give you an example of that. When we had our war against ISIS and we defeated ISIS, that nobody can question that. ISIS fighters still exist. We know that. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go after every single cell, after every single fighter or battalion to actually have a tactical victory. And you have to weigh the pros and cons and the benefits of each operation. And that's what the U.S. is saying, is that this one, as to quote President Biden, was over the top. That's exactly what he said, and that's what he meant.
Hagar, 2 Israeli men who were held hostage for months at this point, going back to October 7th, were rescued last night. That headline seems to have been obscured by the rest of what we're talking about. I wonder what that tells you about the potential for other special forces raids like this to get other hostages out if there is no ceasefire.
I'm glad you mentioned how that news has been drowned out, because there are a lot of headlines will have been focusing. They'll say there was this operation where dozens were killed, and a lot of the headlines are missing that there were 2 hostages released in this raid in an apartment where they were found, which is just fantastic news. It's great news that they found them, and that they released them, and it boosts morale and hope for a lot of these families, of course, and for the military to pursue similar operations. The fact is, it will be hard to release the remaining, and there are about 130, estimated to be about 130. And we saw news last week saying that about 50 have likely died, and that's coming from the Israeli government. It will be very difficult, unfortunately, to release the remaining in raids. If you just look at the history, they were only able to actively release 1 hostage before this. And the other hostages have gone through the hostage prisoner swap. And now to that point, those talks continue, even though you saw headlines last week saying that Netanyahu rejected Hamas's latest counteroffer. That's typically how these negotiations go. Israel had an offer.
So you still have, Hagar, hope hope that a deal like that can be made despite Israel's pushback?
Yes, I do have hope for a few reasons. First, because the talks we do know continue. In fact, Hamas sent a delegation to Cairo to continue to follow up on their counter proposal. So that's one. And their counter offer did not include a demand for a permanent ceasefire. It would include a permanent ceasefire, a demand for a permanent ceasefire to release all the hostages. But anyway, I digress. So that's one reason. Talks continue. The second is that the Hamas and the Israeli government face a lot of pressure on both sides domestically, on the Israeli side to prioritize the release of hostages, and on the Hamas side to end this war altogether. And most Gazans have said, well, at least those that we've seen, who have been in the streets saying, just release the captives. They tie the two together. And that is a correct assertion, to tie the two together. So they're both facing this ongoing pressure. And you've seen them in the past agree to the principle of a ceasefire and hostage prisoner swap. So there's no reason it can't happen again. But you have to understand that from the Israeli government side, they do believe, and a lot of U.S. generals agree with this, that this continued, the continued aggression and what you're seeing from the Israeli side, this brutal campaign, that it also further increases the pressure on Hamas to move toward a deal. And so that's also why you see that strategy from the Israeli government side.